Hey guys, and welcome back to Mr. Ben's Great British Tour. Today we are in the local village of Ribchester. Now Ribchester is quite a historic village because this place has been built on the site of an old Roman fortress. Now the Romans were around about 2,000 years ago. Now if you consider that America's only been around for about 250 years, that shows you how much longer the Romans were around. They're not around anymore, obviously, but they were the creators of what was called the Roman Empire. You may have heard of it. It was a huge, vast, great big empire that controlled most of the Mediterranean and most of Europe. But today, we're going to learn a little bit about what life was like in Roman Britain. So see you shortly. So as we come through here, guys, there's a few things that you might find pretty interesting. If we could just come through these trees here, we'll find this little stone. Now, unfortunately, it's a bit of a rainy day today, but you can still see a couple of the patterns on here. Now, this is a typical Roman art, generally depicting scenes of various divinities or craftsmen going about their daily business. What you can see on certain sides is a group of knights. I think that's one there, as you can see. That's his little favourite toy. He would have been a Sarmatian. Now, the Sarmatians came from what is modern-day Ukraine in Eastern Europe. And they were a group of knights, men on horseback who rode horses, who would come to help out the Roman army in the frontier of Britain. So as we just walk through the Ribchester public gardens, there's a little sign here which should tell us a few things about the local area. We just saw this thing here, the Millennium Column. Now this thing looks pretty cool here. Let's see if we can try and find that somewhere. So as we just walk through a bit further, I think we found it. There we go, look at that. Now you can tell how old this is just by the look of it. Notice as well the sort of strange artistic expression that the Roman sculptors and craftsmen would put on their works of art. This would have been primarily made of limestone and chiseled away by very, very expert craftsmen. Just look at the detail of this here. Bear in mind that these were men and women 2,000 years ago who had little chisels just tapping away at the rock, but they were able to make things like this. And over here is another one. Now this is there's usually a story behind all of these sculptors. I believe this man here is going through a trial of some kind. We don't fully know what kind of trial he's going through. Perhaps referencing the 12 Trials of Hercules. And if you've seen that Disney movie, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. But again, just look at the art style here. You can't really tell on a rainy day, but the leaves and so on do look very spectacular, very impressive. Very difficult to actually get the effect of that, but they did it. They were really remarkable. They were. All right, folks, we've come to a very special place, an archaeological site in Ribchester. Now, 2,000 years ago in Roman times, Ribchester was called Bremetanicum. Its full name was Bremetanicum Veteranorum. Now you may hear an English word in that title, veteran, and that's true. Veteranorum basically meant the dwelling place of veterans. Now, people who had served in the Roman army for about 25 years or so were granted the status of a veteran, which basically meant that they had a plot of land that they could retire on and enjoy the rest of their days. after their service. And what better way to spend your time than in the Roman baths? Now, this little diagram here basically explains what this would have looked like. So, let's have a look. Now, I know what you're thinking, this doesn't look much. You may think that it's just a load of stones in the ground, but 2,000 years ago, this would have been the site of a sprawling, great big bathhouse. Now, there are many rooms to a Roman bathhouse. They made it quite complicated, for their times at least. Generally, if you were to go to a Roman bath, you would begin in a frigidarium, which is the cold room. Now, as you can see, there's no frigidarium here. So what archaeologists think is that because of the size of Bremertanicum, or Ribchester, it was quite a small settlement in Roman Britain, so that would be reflected in the size of the bathhouse, probably, only serving a handful of veterans and auxiliaries and soldiers and so on. So no cold room for them, but in many other cities across the empire, you would begin in the frigidarium. Now, the word frigid, meaning very cold, comes from the Latin root frigidarium. And there's a few other words as well. But what does that say there? Tepidarium. Now, get rid of darium. What does that say? Tepid. Now, if something is tepid, it basically means warm. So a lot of words that we use in the English language, folks, derive from a Latin root. Now, after the cold bath and then the warm bath, you would then head to the coldarium, which is a bit confusing because it sounds like cold, but it has nothing to do with the cold. It's a hot room. And then you would finally finish off in the sweating room, which is basically like a sauna. Now, you may ask, how on earth did they heat this? Well, we'll find out in a moment. So just in the corner around there would have been a furnace. Now, there have been several workers who were working underground in pretty hot and sweaty conditions who would be constantly feeding fires across an underfloor central heating. Now, that would make the floor very, very hot. And obviously, if the water is touching that floor, the water's going to get hot as well. And that's how the Romans had their hot baths. And you can kind of see the outline here as well. It looks a bit like a sort of great big jacuzzi, really. There's the curvature in the, that would have been the sweating room, the little Roman sauna. This rectangular room here, the tepidarium, is the nice warm room. That's probably where I'd want to spend most of my time. And you can actually tell here, look at this. That is a little vent, an old Roman vent that feeds the hot steam from the furnace just in the corner all around the Roman baths. And just before we leave, guys, there's a little well over here. It's been filled in now, but I believe that was a medieval well. So that's about 1,000 years after the Romans left. But yeah, that is the Roman baths, folks. All right, guys, we've come to another archaeological site in Ribchester. These are the foundations of the old Roman granaries. Now, a granary is a big warehouse, storehouse kind of thing, where you would place a lot of food, primarily grains and so on. Now, local grains would probably be things like wheat and rye, maybe barley. And as you can see here, there are little stones just dotted around the outlines of the granaries. Now, those were placed to raise a wooden floor. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, you've got a lot of food in the granaries. Now, what kind of rodents like to scrounge around and feed through a lot of sacks of grain? Yep, you may have guessed it. Rats. Rats get absolutely everywhere where there is food. So, one way to keep the grain safe is to raise it above the floor level, and that keeps the rats away from the food. Little ingenious solution that the Romans thought out 2,000 years ago. Now, let's see if we can get down a little further. So this site was discovered in 1908 by a British archaeologist, and there are still sites around Roman Ribchester that are being discovered, and that gives a lot of archaeology students from local universities a lot of activities to be getting up with, to be staying busy. So yeah, you can see the outlines of what the old granary buildings would be here. And it's incredible that this stone is still pretty much intact. Now, over time, obviously, people would be, over the course of 2,000 years, raiding the stone for other building works and so on. But the foundations are still here, 2,000 years later. Pretty remarkable. Okay, folks, so those were the main archaeological sites in Ribchester, Roman Ribchester Brenetanicum Veteranorum. Now, a trip to Ribchester would never be complete without a visit to the Roman Ribchester Museum. Now, I actually used to work here for a little while. I used to do little events dressing up in Roman armour and so on, looking like a Roman soldier. Might have a few photos of those of me packed somewhere. Might be able to get to see them later, who knows. But for now, let's have a look inside. So, let's just come through the main entrance. I've spoken to the curator a little earlier, so he knows I'm going to be here. I get a few nice videos for you guys. So, right this way. Now, as you can see here, it begins with the Bronze Age. Now, the Bronze Age was a long time ago. We're talking about 3,000 years ago. And these are the kind of buildings that ancient Britons would live in, little thatched huts. And this is all before the Romans came. And then we move on to the Iron Age, and that's pretty much the time just before the Romans arrived. Now, if you're wondering whereabouts in Britain we are, so that's the map of the British Isles, and we are right there, around this part of the country. Now, Ribchester is actually there. Don't know why it's there. It's actually around here. And one of the major Celtic tribes was the Brigantes. Hello. And the Brigantes ruled over much of what is now modern Yorkshire and so on. Hunter-gathering, another big part of life in pre-Roman Britain. So let's follow the signs and see what else we can see. Now, doesn't that look very imposing? Yes, that bit of artwork is a reference to the old Roman cavalry helmet. And you might be able to see that a little further. Oh, look at this. This is an imitation of a Roman mosaic. And this is a map of what was the Roman Empire. Now, this is Europe here. We've got France, we've got Italy, Spain, Germany. The Romans never really conquered Germany, but they did make a long border right around Europe here. And they also went into a bit of the Middle East. You've got Turkey, or as it was known then, Anatolia, and Judea, and a bit of Mesopotamia, and of course, Egypt. And right in the corner of the empire is Old Britannia. Now, notice they never really got into Scotland, the Romans. They basically stopped in northern England, and they built a great big wall called Hadrian's Wall. And the Caledonians paid for it. No, I'm only joking. It was financed by the Roman state under Emperor Hadrian in the early 2nd century. Now, this is a fascinating map. The Romans were very, very famous for building roads, and this is a map of all the Roman roads that they built in Britain. Now, these were used for about at least 1,800 years after the departure of the Romans from Britain, right up until the Victorian times, or slightly before. And a lot of the modern highways in England and Wales are actually based upon the old Roman road system itself. Now, here we go. This is the forts. This is the main reason why we're here. This is an idea of an artistic impression of what Roman Ribchester would have looked like. You can see it's pretty impressive, isn't it? The granaries are over here, by the way, right next to the big headquarters where the Roman officer would reside. And all the little buildings here, these are barracks. So all of these would house Roman soldiers. And usually what you'd find is that next to a Roman fort, some kind of urban area would develop as well. Because with thousands and thousands of men with money to spend, they're going to need to be fed, they're going to be entertained, they're going to need all kinds of amenities. And that, in a way, was a driver of urban growth in Roman Britain. All right, folks, I definitely have to show you this guy. Now, this guy here is a Roman soldier, as you can probably tell. Now, notice from the dress he's wearing here, it's not the plate metal that you see in the Hollywood movies, maybe in Gladiator or something like that. This is chainmail. Now, the plate mail was known as lorica segmentata, the segmented plates. This guy is wearing lorica hustmata. Hustmata is Roman, basically for chainmail arm, which mostly indicates that this guy is an auxiliary. Now, an auxiliary was a soldier in the Roman army who wasn't a Roman citizen. But you may remember when we were talking about the veterans in the bathhouse, after 25 years of service in the Roman army, you became a Roman citizen. So that was one of the ways, one of the paths to citizenships for people incorporated in the Roman Empire. Now, just a bit further on, guys, you may remember I was talking about the Sarmatians earlier, the Sarmatian knights. Now, if you've heard about King Arthur, that legend has a lot to do with these guys, the ancient Sarmatians. Fabulous, fantastic horsemen, absolutely very, very brilliantly skilled in horse riding and archery and so on. So yeah, there's a few other nice things here. Like this. There's plenty of these old Roman sculptures and artifacts just littered around the English countryside. People are discovering them all the time. It's pretty cool. So, just as we leave our Italic friend behind, by Marcus, we're going to come to a more quaint section of the museum. This is what village life was like. Before, during, and after the Roman occupation. You can see down here some old pieces of pottery. Now, these were called amphora, and they were made from clay and so on, primarily from materials like that. Now, the group of people that came before the Romans were called the Celts. Now, you may have heard of the Celts or Celtic culture because it still exists today. And they were phenomenal craftsmen and artists who had their own pagan religion, their own gods, their own concept of the afterlife, and their own distinct culture, material culture. Just below us, you can actually see some of those old Roman granary slabs, which is pretty cool. So just have a look at this. This is what archaeologists have found, digging stuff up. These are old Roman sandal shoes. Now, I've worn those for about 8 hours straight, and believe me, they are not the most comfortable things to wear. They're flat-footed. They don't support your sole, so the sole of your foot, rather. So when you're standing in those for 8 hours on a Roman reenactment day, it's not as fun as you might think, but it's all worth it for the glory of Rome. Just before we head through again, guys, I just want to show you this nice little impression of what a Roman bathhouse looked like. You can see there, that's where all the vents with all the hot air would be going through, heating up the floor, and your little warm bath there to be nice and warm, nice and toasty. Thermae as well, Latin for bath. Now, you may have heard thermal in relation to water and heat and so on. That's another word that we get from the Romans. So when you say, what have the Romans ever done for us? It's not just the aqueducts. It's most of our language, actually, or at least some of it. All right, guys, so that brings us to the end of today's tour of Roman Ribchester. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been great fun coming here again. All that is left for me to say now is Vale Liberi, as the Romans would say, meaning bye everyone. Bye folks.